The security footage timestamp read 11:47 p.m. when Helen Davies clocked out of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. 23 minutes later, 3 black Suburbans screeched into the emergency bay, disgorging 12 Navy SEALs in full tactical gear who stormed through the automatic doors asking for her by name. The night supervisor, Dr. Marcus Reinhardt, nearly dropped his cappuccino when the team leader, a broad-shouldered lieutenant commander with a face like carved granite, demanded to know Helen's location. "The cleaning lady?" Reinhardt had laughed, mopping espresso from his designer scrubs. "You've got the wrong person. She just empties bedpans and mops floors." The SEAL didn't smile. "Ma'am's current location, now." "Ma'am," they called her ma'am. The 52-year-old woman they were searching for had gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, knees that clicked when she walked, and hands that trembled when she thought no one was watching. She wore orthopedic shoes with worn-down heels and carried her belongings in a canvas tote bag with a broken zipper. Most of the staff didn't know her last name. The residents called her Helen the housekeeper when they bothered to call her anything at all. But 23 minutes after her shift ended, the most elite warriors in the United States military were tearing through the hospital looking for her like she was the president himself. What they didn't know, what nobody at St. Catherine's knew, was that Helen Davies wasn't actually Helen Davies, and she wasn't a housekeeper. How does a woman go from invisible to indispensable in less than half an hour? What secret could be so explosive that it would bring the Navy's finest to a third-rate Chicago hospital at midnight? And why, when they finally found her in the staff parking lot, fumbling with her car keys in the rain, did 6 battle-hardened SEALs snap to attention and render the sharpest salute any of them had ever given? The answer lay buried in classified files, in sand-swept memories of Fallujah, and in a promise made 13 years ago under the shadow of a burning helicopter. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning. To the moment Helen Davies became nobody. Helen's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. every morning. Not because her shift started early, it didn't begin until 7 a.m., but because her body needed time. Time for the joints to unlock. Time for the tremor in her hands to settle enough to button her uniform. Time for the pain medication to kick in so she could make it through another 12-hour shift on her feet. She lived alone in a studio apartment in Pilsen, one of Chicago's cheaper neighborhoods. The rent was $850 a month. Still too much, but manageable on her housekeeper's salary of $15.50 an hour. The apartment had come furnished with mismatched furniture and a radiator that clanged like someone hitting pipes with a wrench. Helen didn't mind. She'd slept in worse places. Much worse places. Her morning routine was mechanical. Shower. Pills. 3 for pain, 1 for blood pressure, 2 vitamins that probably didn't do anything but felt like trying. Toast with butter, never jam. Black coffee in a chipped mug that said, "World's Best Mom," though she'd never had children. She'd found it at Goodwill for 75 cents. The tremor in her hands was worst in the mornings. Sometimes it took her 3 tries to get the key in the ignition of her 2006 Honda Civic. The car had 187,000 miles on it and made a sound like a failing lawnmower, but it ran. That was enough. St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital loomed over the south side like a concrete tombstone. It was a level 2 trauma center, which meant it got the cases too complicated for urgent care, but not quite dramatic enough for the university hospitals downtown. Gunshot wounds from gang violence, car accidents from the Dan Ryan Expressway, overdoses from the opioid epidemic that had turned neighborhoods into graveyards. Helen parked in the back lot, in the section reserved for auxiliary staff, the hospital's polite term for people they considered beneath the doctors, nurses, and even the EMTs. She clocked in at 6:58 a.m., grabbed her cleaning cart from the supply closet, and began her rounds. Floor 3, medical surgical. Floor 4, cardiac. Floor 5, pediatrics. Her job was simple: empty trash bins, mop up bodily fluids, wipe down surfaces with industrial disinfectant that made her eyes water, replace the hazardous waste bags in the sharp containers, stock the supply closets, erase the evidence that humans were messy, mortal, breakable things. Nobody looked at her, not really. The doctors walked past like she was furniture. The nurses occasionally barked orders. "Helen, there's vomit in room 412," or "Helen, we need more towels in the ICU," but never made eye contact. She was part of the infrastructure, as visible as the HVAC system, as appreciated as functioning plumbing. She preferred it that way. At 11:30 a.m., Helen took her lunch break in the basement cafeteria. She always sat at the same table in the corner, the one with the wobbly leg that nobody else wanted. She brought her lunch from home, usually a sandwich and an apple, because the cafeteria food cost more than she could justify spending. Today, as she unwrapped her turkey and cheese on wheat bread, 2 residents sat down at the table next to hers. They were young, probably late 20s, with that particular brand of exhaustion that came from 36-hour shifts and too much coffee. "Did you see the new attending in the ER?" the first one said. He was tall, with carefully styled hair and a name tag that read Dr. J. Sterling. The blonde? Yeah, she's not her. Him? Dr. Marcus Reinhardt. Guy's got connections. His dad's on the hospital board. Ah, one of those. Exactly. Got the job straight out of his fellowship. Never worked in a real trauma center. Apparently spent his residency at some private hospital in Connecticut, where the most exciting case was a golf cart accident. They both laughed. Helen kept her eyes on her sandwich. She'd learned the art of invisibility. People said the most interesting things when they forgot you were there. Think he can handle this place? The second resident asked. Sterling snorted. Doubt it, but when your last name's on a building, competence is optional. Helen finished her lunch in silence, threw away her trash, and returned to work. She was mopping the hallway outside the ER when she first saw Dr. Marcus Reinhardt in action. Or rather, in inaction. The ambulance had just arrived. The EMTs were wheeling in a man on a gurney, shouting vitals. 32-year-old male, GSW to the abdomen, BP 80/40 and dropping, lost consciousness in the rig. Reinhardt stood in the trauma bay looking at his tablet, not looking at the patient, looking at his tablet. Doctor, the lead EMT said, we need orders. I'm looking at his chart, Reinhardt said, not glancing up. He doesn't have a chart yet, doctor. He was shot 15 minutes ago. Well, get me his medical history. We need to know about allergies, previous conditions. Doctor, he's bleeding out. The nurses had already begun working. IV lines in, pressure on the wound, monitoring equipment beeping its urgent song. But they couldn't do the critical interventions without a doctor's orders. Helen's hands stopped moving. The mop handle was suddenly very still in her grip. She'd seen this before. The paralysis of overthinking, the fear of making a mistake that leads to the bigger mistake of doing nothing at all. In combat, that hesitation got people killed. She caught herself. Not your job anymore, she thought. Not your life. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Reinhardt finally looked up from his tablet. Okay, let's get a CT scan and... Doctor, there's no time for a CT scan, the senior nurse said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. He needs surgery now. I need to see the imaging first. We don't want to miss anything. Helen turned away and kept mopping. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of bleach and blood mingled in her nostrils. Behind her, she heard the patient's monitors begin to alarm. Not your problem. Not anymore. She'd made a promise, 13 years ago, a promise to disappear, a promise to let the past stay buried. So Helen Davies, housekeeper, pushed her cart down the hallway and left Dr. Marcus Reinhardt to figure it out on his own. Even if people died while he was learning, Dr. Marcus Reinhardt was 34 years old, 6'2", and possessed the kind of face that women called classically handsome and men called punchable. His dark hair was always perfectly coiffed. His scrubs were designer brand. He'd had them tailored. And he wore a Rolex Submariner that cost more than Helen made in a year. His father, Richard Reinhardt III, had donated $12 million to St. Catherine's expansion project. The Reinhardt Cardiac Wing had been named in his honor. When Marcus graduated from his fellowship at Yale, not with honors, but he graduated, Richard made a few calls. 3 weeks later, Marcus was the new attending physician in St. Catherine's emergency department. Competence, as Dr. Sterling had noted, was optional when your last name was on a building. Helen first experienced Marcus Reinhardt's particular brand of cruelty during her 3rd week at St. Catherine's. She'd been restocking supplies in exam room 7 when Reinhardt walked in with 2 residents trailing behind him like ducklings. And this is why proper protocol matters, he was saying, not acknowledging Helen's presence. Too many people in medicine take shortcuts. They think experience trumps procedure. It doesn't. He noticed Helen then, the way you might notice a piece of lint on your sleeve. His eyes traveled over her gray hair, her worn uniform, her trembling hands as she placed gauze packages on the shelf. Excuse me, he said, not unpleasantly. We need this room. Can you clean somewhere else? Almost done, doctor, Helen said quietly, not making eye contact. Almost isn't done. His smile didn't reach his eyes. This is a teaching hospital. When we need a room for education, auxiliary staff need to vacate immediately. Auxiliary? Staff. Like she was an auxiliary human. Of course, Helen said, collecting her supplies. As she pushed her cart past him, Reinhardt wrinkled his nose. And maybe use a different disinfectant? This one smells like a nursing home. The residents laughed dutifully. Helen kept walking. Over the following months, a pattern emerged. Reinhardt seemed to take special pleasure in reminding Helen of her place in the hospital hierarchy. He'd snap his fingers when he wanted her attention. He'd complain about her cleaning. Too slow, not thorough enough, using the wrong products. He once told a nurse, loudly enough for Helen to hear, that they should screen housekeeping staff better because standards had obviously slipped. Helen endured it. She'd endured worse. Men like Reinhardt existed everywhere, in hospitals, in the military, in life. They were the ones born on third base who thought they'd hit a triple. Confronting them achieved nothing except painting a target on your back. Besides, she needed this job. She needed the anonymity. And she'd made a promise. So when Reinhardt mocked her for being slow, "Maybe it's time to retire, Helen. Let someone younger do the work," she said nothing. When he complained to her supervisor that she'd left streaks on a window, attention to detail matters, even in housekeeping, she apologized. When he started a rumor that she'd been stealing pain medication from the supply closets, completely false, but investigated. Anyway, she submitted to the humiliating locker searches without complaint. The other staff treated her with indifference, or at best pity. The nurses had their own problems. The residents were too exhausted to care about workplace politics. The administration saw her as replaceable. Only one person ever stood up for her. Arthur Chen was 68 years old, a security guard who worked the night shift. He was a Vietnam veteran with kind eyes and steady hands, and he'd been at St. Catherine's longer than anyone could remember. He and Helen often crossed paths during her evening rounds. "Don't let him get to you," Arthur said one night, after Reinhardt had publicly berated Helen for leaving a cleaning cart in the hallway. "Guys like that, they're all show. No substance." "It's fine," Helen said. "It's not fine, it's bullying." Helen smiled at him, grateful but tired. "I've dealt with worse." She didn't elaborate. Arthur didn't push, but things came to a head 3 months into Reinhardt's tenure at St. Catherine's. It was a Friday night, the kind of shift where everything that could go wrong did. A multi-car pileup on the expressway had flooded the ER with casualties. The waiting room was standing room only. Every trauma bay was occupied. The nurses were running on fumes and adrenaline. Helen was cleaning Trauma Bay 3, the fastest she'd ever cleaned, trying to free up space for the next critical patient, when she overheard Reinhardt talking to a group of residents in the hallway. "Classic case of Peter Principle," he was saying. "You promote someone beyond their competence level, and they fail. Hospitals do it with nurses all the time. Hell, they did it with housekeeping, too." One of the residents glanced at Helen, visible through the open door, and lowered her voice. Reinhardt didn't bother. "I mean, look at Helen," he continued. "She's probably been cleaning toilets for 30 years. You think she has any idea what happens in these rooms? What life and death decisions we make? She empties the trash and goes home. No stress, no real responsibility. Must be nice." The residents laughed nervously. "I'm serious," Reinhardt went on, warming to his theme. "I bet you $20 Helen couldn't identify a pneumothorax if her life depended on it. Couldn't tell you the difference between ketamine and Klonopin. Probably thinks intubation is some kind of internet service." More laughter. Helen's hands had stopped, trembling. They were completely still now, gripping the mop handle like a weapon. She could see herself reflected in the polished floor. Gray hair, cheap uniform, invisible. Reinhardt's voice carried into the trauma bay. "You know what? Maybe we should test her. Hey, Helen?" He appeared in the doorway, that perfect smile on his perfect face. "Quick question. If a patient presents with absent breath, sounds on one side and tracheal deviation, what's your diagnosis?" The residents crowded. Behind him, waiting for the joke to land. Helen looked up, met his eyes, saw the cruelty there, the casual contempt of someone who'd never been told no, never faced real consequences, never learned that rank and competence weren't the same thing. She could answer. She could tell him it was a tension pneumothorax. She could explain the pathophysiology, the immediate treatment protocol, the complications. She could describe the exact feeling of inserting a needle into the second. Intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and hearing that hiss of released pressure. She could tell him she'd performed that procedure 17 times in combat zones, under fire, with her hands covered in someone else's blood. But that would raise questions. Questions she couldn't answer without unraveling everything she'd built, everything she'd sacrificed to stay hidden. So Helen Davies, housekeeper, lowered her eyes and said, "I don't know, doctor." Reinhardt's laugh was triumphant. "There you go. $20, please, Dr. Morrison." He walked away, pocketing his winnings. Helen finished mopping Trauma Bay 3. Her hands were trembling again. Not from Parkinson's disease or nerve damage or any of the things people assumed when they bothered to think about it at all. From rage. The call came in at 2:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. Helen was restocking gauze in the supply closet on floor 4 when she heard the overhead speaker crackle to life. "Trauma alert, inbound, ETA 3s. Minutes. Male, early 20s, multiple GSSWs, GCS of 3, BP 60/30. All available personnel to Trauma Bay 1. GCS of 3? Glasgow coma scale. The lowest possible score. Essentially dead, but not quite." Helen's hands stopped moving. Multiple gunshot wounds. Blood pressure barely compatible with life. That young. She told herself to keep working. Not your problem, not your job. But her feet carried her toward the stairwell anyway. Just to observe, just to make sure they had enough clean. Towels in the trauma bay. She was lying to herself. The ER was controlled chaos when she arrived. Nurses prepping equipment, residents pulling on gowns and gloves, the trauma surgeon, Dr. Ellen Vasquez, one of the competent ones, snapping orders, and Dr. Marcus Reinhardt, the attending on duty, standing at the nurse's station looking at his phone. "Dr. Reinhardt," Vasquez called out, "we need you in Trauma 1. "I'm reviewing the protocols," he said, not looking up. "Want to make sure we do this by the book." Vasquez's jaw tightened. "The patient will be here in 90 seconds. "I'm aware." The ambulance bay doors burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in, one performing CPR on a young black man whose chest was a mess of blood and torn fabric. The other was calling out vitals in the rapid-fire shorthand of emergency medicine. 3 GSWs, 2 to the chest, 1 to the abdomen, started CPR in the field after he went into cardiac arrest. 1 epi given, 1 round of compressions. Still no pulse. Rode him in at 80 miles per hour. He's 23 years old. Name's Terrence Williams. They transferred him to the trauma bay table. The monitors erupted in alarm. Flatline on the EKG, oxygen saturation unmeasurable, blood pressure non-existent. "He's in PA," one of the nurses called out. Pulseless electrical activity. The heart showing electrical signals, but no actual beating. Dr. Vasquez was already working. "Continue compressions. Someone bag him. Get the ultrasound machine. We need to see what we're dealing with." Reinhardt finally entered the trauma bay, pulling on a gown. Okay, let's stay calm. By the book, people. "Marcus, we don't have time for—" "I'm the attending, Ellen. We're going to do this right." He looked at the monitors. "Why hasn't anyone gotten a chest x-ray?" "Because he's dying," Vasquez snapped. "We need to crack his chest now." "We need imaging first. We can't just—" "There's no time for imaging." Helen stood just outside the trauma bay, mop in hand, watching through the glass. She shouldn't be here. She should leave. But her eyes were tracking everything. The young man's chest wasn't moving right. The left side seemed fuller, distended. She knew that presentation. Tension pneumothorax, air trapped in the pleural space, building pressure, collapsing the lung, shifting the heart and major vessels, preventing blood from returning to the heart. Reversible. If caught immediately. Fatal. If not. "Get me the portable x-ray," Reinhardt ordered. "Doctor, we don't have time. I need to see what's happening before we proceed." Vasquez looked like she wanted to scream. "Fine. Someone page radiology?" "They're not answering," a nurse said, phone pressed to her ear. "It's the middle of the night." "Then find someone." Precious seconds ticked by. Compressions continued. Epinephrine was pushed. The monitors kept screaming. Helen's feet moved without permission. She found herself at the trauma bay door. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Nobody heard her. "Excuse me," she said louder. Dr. Vasquez glanced up, irritated. "Helen?" "Not now. He has a tension pneumothorax." The room went silent except for the monitors and the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of chest compressions. Reinhardt turned to stare at her. "What did you say?" "Tension pneumothorax. Left side. You can see the tracheal deviation, the distended neck veins, absent breath sounds on the left. He needs a needle decompression immediately." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Reinhardt laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Are you serious?" "Helen, get back to your closet. This is an emergency." "I know it's an emergency. That's why I'm telling you what's wrong. You're a housekeeper, and he's dying because you won't listen." Vasquez looked between them, then at the patient. Her trained eyes suddenly saw what Helen had seen. The subtle asymmetry, the distension, the tracheal shift. "Oh my God," she breathed. "She's right." "She is not right," Reinhardt said, his face flushing. "She cleans floors. She doesn't diagnose—" "Marcus, look at the trachea. Look at the neck veins." "I don't see anything." "Because you don't want to see it." Vasquez grabbed an angiocath from the supply tray. "I'm doing a needle decompression." "You will not." Reinhardt stepped between her and the patient. "Not without imaging. That's an order." "That order will kill him." "Hospital." Protocol requires imaging before any invasive. Helen had heard enough. She'd made a promise 13 years ago to disappear, to never use her skills again, to let the past stay buried. But she'd made another promise, too, a longer-standing one that superseded personal comfort and safety and fear. First, do no harm. Actually, the Hippocratic Oath didn't say exactly that, but the principle remained. When you had the skills to save a life and chose not to use them, you were complicit in the death. Helen pushed past Reinhardt. He was taller, stronger, but she had training he'd never dreamed of. She moved with a speed and precision that shocked everyone in the room, grabbing a 14-gauge angiocath from the tray, ripping open the package with her teeth. "What the hell are you? Security!" Reinhardt shouted. Helen ignored him. She placed her trembling fingers on the young man's chest. Second intercostal space. Mid-clavicular line. She could feel it even through the blood and trauma. The tremor disappeared. Her hands were suddenly perfectly steady, muscle memory from 1,000 procedures in 100 war zones. She plunged the needle in. Hiss! The sound of trapped air escaping under pressure, like letting air out of an overinflated tire. The effect was immediate. The patient's chest wall relaxed, the distension normalized, and beep, beep, beep. A pulse. Weak, thready, barely there, but a pulse. The monitors changed. Oxygen saturation began to climb. Blood pressure ticked upward. 70/40. Not good, but better than dead. "I have a pulse," the nurse doing compression shouted. "I have a pulse." The trauma bay erupted in controlled chaos. Vasquez took over, barking orders, getting the patient stabilized for emergency surgery. The residents scrambled to follow her commands, and Helen stood there, the bloody angiocath still in her hand, staring at Terrence Williams' face. He looked peaceful now, unconscious, but peaceful. She'd seen that look before, in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in the Hindu Kush mountains where the air was thin and the bullets were thick. "You." Reinhardt's voice cut through the noise. He was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. "You just assaulted a patient. You performed a medical procedure without authorization. She saved his life," Vasquez said quietly. "She violated protocol. She's not a doctor. She's not even a nurse. She's right, though. Look at the monitor. He's stabilizing. I don't care if she's right. She doesn't have the authority. She could have collapsed his lung, caused a pneumothorax, killed him." "He already had a pneumothorax," Helen said. Her voice was steady, calm. The voice she'd used when talking scared soldiers through triage under mortar fire. "Attention, pneumothorax, which you failed to diagnose." Reinhardt's face went purple. "Get out! You're fired! Security! Security!" Arthur Chen appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "Dr. Reinhardt? Escort this woman off the premises. She's terminated, effective immediately." Arthur looked at Helen. She gave him a small nod. "Yes, sir," Arthur said softly. Helen set down the angiocath, stripped off the gloves she'd somehow acquired, and walked toward the door. Behind her, Terrence Williams was being wheeled toward the OR, his vital signs steadying, his chance of survival climbing from 0 to maybe. She'd saved his life, and it had cost her everything. The walk to the security office was silent. Arthur didn't ask questions. Helen didn't offer explanations. "You didn't have to do that," Arthur said finally, as they reached the office. "Yes," Helen said. "I did." They collected her belongings from her locker. A spare uniform, the broken zippered tote bag, a photograph in a plastic frame, Helen in her 20s, arm around another woman, both of them laughing, both wearing military fatigues. Helen put the frame in her bag without looking at it. "I'm sorry," Arthur said. "Don't be. I knew the consequences." She signed the termination paperwork. Effective immediately. Cause: gross misconduct, unauthorized medical procedure, violation of hospital protocol, no severance, no references. Security footage would be reviewed, possible criminal charges pending. Helen signed her name, Helen Davies, which wasn't really her name, and walked out of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital at 3:47 a.m. It was raining. Of course it was raining. Her car was in the auxiliary lot, a quarter-mile from the main building. She walked slowly, her knees protesting every step. The pain medication had worn off hours ago. The adrenaline from the trauma bay was fading, leaving behind exhaustion that settled into her bones like cold. She was 52 years old, unemployed, with a termination for gross misconduct on her record that would make finding any job impossible. The Civic's engine coughed to life on the third try. Helen sat in the driver's seat, rain hammering on the roof, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something close to despair. Then she put the car in drive and went home. Her apartment was dark and cold. The radiator clanged its protest. Helen made tea with shaking hands, the tremor was back, worse than usual, and sat at the small table that served as her dining room, desk, and entire living space. She should be upset, angry, scared about money, about the future, about the bills she wouldn't be able to pay. But all she could think about was Terrence Williams' face, the way his chest had risen after the decompression, the beeping of the monitors as his heart found its rhythm again. 23 years old, somebody's son, maybe somebody's brother, boyfriend, father. Alive because she'd broken her promise. Helen pulled out the photograph from her bag, looked at it properly for the first time in months. 2 women. One was Helen, younger, harder, with eyes that had seen things no one should see. The other was Captain Sarah Mitchell, her best friend, her mentor, the woman who'd saved Helen's life in a firefight outside Kandahar. Sarah was dead now, had been for 13 years, killed by an IED that Helen should have been able to prevent, should have seen, should have... She put the photograph away. The sun rose at 6:14 a.m. Helen didn't sleep. She sat at her table, drinking cold tea, thinking about choices and consequences, and promises made to dead people who couldn't release her from them. At 9:00 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But habits from her old life died hard. Unknown numbers could mean anything. Orders, intelligence, threats. Hello? Helen Davies? A woman's voice, professional, clipped. Yes. This is Linda Morrison from St. Catherine's Human Resources. We need you to come in for an exit interview and to sign additional paperwork. Today, if possible. More paperwork. More documentation of her failure to remain invisible. When? Helen asked. 2 p.m.? Fine. She hung up. Helen showered, took her pills, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, both from Goodwill. Looked at herself in the mirror. Gray hair, lined face, invisible woman. Except she wasn't invisible anymore. She'd been seen. The drive back to St. Catherine's felt surreal. 12 hours ago, she'd been employed. Invisible. Safe in her anonymity. Now she was unemployed. Visible. And about to sign her name to documents that might include criminal charges. But Terrence Williams was alive. She parked in the visitor lot this time. No longer entitled to the auxiliary lot. No longer part of the infrastructure. The HR office was on the second floor. A sterile space with motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. Linda Morrison was a woman in her 50s, with severe bangs, and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. Ms. Davies, thank you for coming. Morrison gestured to a chair. We need to discuss last night's incident. I understand. Do you? Because what you did was extraordinarily reckless. You performed a medical procedure without license, without authorization, in direct defiance of the attending physician's orders. The patient was dying. That's not your determination to make. You're a housekeeper. I was a housekeeper. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Dr. Reinhardt is considering filing charges. Assault, practicing medicine without a license, possibly criminal negligence. The office door opened. A man entered. He was in his 60s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Helen's car. His face was weathered but commanding. Military bearing, officer's posture. Behind him were 3 men in combat fatigues, not hospital security, Navy SEALs. Helen's heart stopped. Linda, the older man said, I'll take it from here. Morrison looked confused. I'm sorry. Who? Rear Admiral James Hawthorne, U.S. Navy. This matter is now under military jurisdiction. He placed a badge and ID on Morrison's desk. Official. Federal. Superseding everything. Morrison looked at the SEALs, then at Hawthorne, then at Helen. I don't understand, Morrison said. Hawthorne smiled. It wasn't friendly. Ms. Davies isn't who you think she is. Rear Admiral Hawthorne dismissed Linda Morrison with a gesture that brooked no argument. The HR director left, confusion and indignation warring on her face. The office fell silent. The 3 SEALs stood at parade rest by the door. Young men, probably late 20s, early 30s, hard faces, harder eyes, the kind of operators who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer and walked through it anyway. Hawthorne sat down across from Helen, studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Lieutenant Colonel, he said finally. Helen's breath caught. Nobody had called her that in 13 years. I'm not... She started. You performed a needle decompression at Aero 2, 37 hours. Saved the life of one Terrence Williams, aged 23, former Army Ranger, now a veteran struggling with PTSD and substance abuse. You didn't know that when you saved him, did you? No. The trauma surgeon, Dr. Vasquez, filed an incident report. Said a housekeeper performed an emergency medical procedure with the skill of a trained combat medic. That raised flags. We ran your fingerprints from the locker room. He slid a folder across the desk. Want to explain why Helen Davies doesn't exist? Helen looked at the folder, didn't open it. She knew what was inside. It's complicated, she said. I've got time. Behind Hawthorne, one of the SEALs shifted slightly. The team leader, Helen guessed, lieutenant commander by his insignia. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. I left the service 13 years ago, Helen said. Medical discharge, honorable. I came to Chicago because nobody knew me here. Started over. As a housekeeper. Yes. Why? Because I made a promise. Because people died and I couldn't save them. Because every time I close my eyes I see Sarah Mitchell's face and the fire and the blood and... I wanted a simple life, Helen said. Hawthorne opened the folder, read from it. Lieutenant Colonel Diane Morse, combat medic, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, 43 combat saves, 27 surgeries performed under fire. He looked up. That's not someone who becomes a housekeeper. The SEAL team leader spoke for the first time. His voice was rough, like gravel on steel. Ma'am, Kandahar, June 14th, 2012. Do you remember? Helen went very still. I remember a lot of days in Kandahar, she said carefully. This one was special. He took a step forward. Convoy ambush. IED took out the lead vehicle. Small arms. Fire from 3 directions. I took shrapnel to the femoral artery, bleeding out in the dirt. He was in his early 30s now. Do the math. He would have been 19, maybe 20 in 2012. A medic appeared, he continued. Came running through the kill zone like it was a jog in the park. Put a tourniquet on my leg so tight I thought she'd cut it off. Plugged the wound with her fingers until the helo arrived. Told me stories about her hometown to keep me conscious. Made me promise I'd survive. His eyes were wet now. I asked her name. She said, "Doesn't matter, Ranger. You're going home." But I heard the others call her Ghost. Helen's hands were shaking. Not from nerve damage. From memory. Ghost? Hawthorne confirmed, reading from the file. Your call sign, because you appeared out of nowhere when soldiers were dying and disappeared just as fast. There are 43 soldiers alive today because of you. 42, Helen said quietly. Hawthorne frowned. What? 42? I lost one. The room fell silent. Helen closed her eyes. She was back there. The heat, the dust, the smell of burning fuel and human flesh. The helicopter was going down. Not crashing, not yet. But the tail rotor had taken an RPG round and they were spinning, auto-rotating, the pilot fighting for control while the desert rushed up to meet them like an angry fist. Brace! 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 The pilot shouted. Captain Sarah Mitchell grabbed Helen's hand. If we die, I'm haunting you. Deal, Helen said. They hit hard. The world became noise and violence and spinning metal. Helen's head slammed against something, the bulkhead maybe, and stars exploded behind her eyes. When the helicopter finally stopped moving, Helen took inventory. Bleeding from a scalp wound, probably concussion, shoulder dislocated, but alive. Around her, the Black Hawk was a wreck. The pilots were slumped forward, unconscious, or worse. 3 Rangers were groaning, injured, but moving. 2 weren't moving at all, and Sarah was pinned under a collapsed seat frame, blood pooling beneath her. Diane, she whispered, Helen's real name. My legs. I can't feel my legs. Helen tried to move, her vision swam. The dislocated shoulder screamed, but she crawled to Sarah anyway, medical training overriding pain. The injuries were catastrophic. The seat frame had crushed Sarah's lower spine, lacerated the aorta, massive internal bleeding. You're going to be fine, Helen lied. You're a terrible liar. Sarah coughed. Blood flecked her lips. How bad? Helen didn't answer. Outside, gunfire erupted. The ambush wasn't over. The Taliban knew a downed helo when they saw one, and they were coming to finish the job. One of the Rangers, Corporal Jackson, barely 21, appeared at her side. Doc, we gotta move. They're coming. Help me get her out. Doc, now, Corporal. They tried. God, they tried. But the frame was wedged, and Sarah was losing blood. And the gunfire was getting closer, and the other Rangers were yelling that hostiles were 50 meters out, 40 meters, 30. Sarah grabbed Helen's hand. Go. No. That's an order, Lieutenant Colonel. Fuck your order. Sarah smiled, blood on her teeth. There it is, my Diane, the woman who tells generals to fuck off. The gunfire was 20 meters away now. Jackson was dragging at Helen, physically pulling her toward the helicopter door. I can give you morphine, Helen said, desperately. Make it easier. Save it for the Rangers who can still fight. Sarah's grip tightened. Promise me something. Anything. Don't let this destroy you. The guilt, the what-ifs. You're a healer, Diane. Don't stop healing because you couldn't save one. I can't leave you. You already have. Jackson pulled Helen out of the helicopter. She was screaming Sarah's name, fighting him. But he was stronger and she was injured and the Taliban were 10 meters away and... the... extraction. Helo appeared overhead, door gunner laying down suppressive fire. They winched up the survivors. 5 Rangers, 1 medic. Not 6. Not Sarah. Helen watched from the ascending helicopter as the Taliban reached the crash site, as they swarmed the Black Hawk. As Sarah Mitchell, captain, healer, hero, best friend, died alone in the dust, Helen opened her eyes. She was back in the HR office at St. Catharines. Rear Admiral Hawthorne was watching her carefully. Captain Sarah. Mitchell, he said softly. She was your friend. She was more than that. She was my CO, my mentor. The reason I joined the Rangers as a medic instead of staying in a regular unit. You saved 5 soldiers that day. By all accounts, you're a hero. I let Sarah die. The report says she was unsalvageable. The report is wrong. Hawthorne closed the folder. Is that why you disappeared? Changed your name? Became a housekeeper? I made a promise to Sarah that I wouldn't let the guilt destroy me. That I'd keep healing. Helen's voice cracked. But every time I used my skills, I saw her face. So I stopped using them. Until last night. The SEAL team leader, his name tag read Hansen, spoke again. Ma'am, with respect, that's bullshit. Helen looked at him startled. You saved my life, Hansen continued. You saved 41 other lives. You probably saved thousands of lives through your training of other medics. And last night, you saved Terrence Williams. You think Captain Mitchell would want you emptying bedpans instead of doing what you do best? You didn't know her. I knew she died saving her team. I know she told you to keep healing. And I know, his voice grew rough, that when I have nightmares about bleeding out in Kandahar, the face I see isn't the Taliban's. It's yours, telling me I was going home, making me promise to survive. He stepped forward, saluted, sharp, perfect from the heart. I kept that promise, ma'am. Did you? Helen felt something break inside her chest. Not breaking down, breaking open. 13 years of grief and guilt and self-imposed penance cracking apart. She'd kept the wrong promise. Sarah hadn't asked her to stop healing. She'd asked her not to let guilt destroy her, and Helen had let it destroy her anyway. The reason we're here, Hawthorne said, isn't just about your past. It's about what happened last night. Do you know who Terrence Williams is? Former Army Ranger. You said he was struggling with PTSD and substance abuse? He's also the son of General Marcus Williams, commander of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. Helen's blood went cold. The general is currently in Syria overseeing counterterrorism operations. He gets a call at 0300 hours local time that his son was shot in a gang-related incident in Chicago and is in surgery. Might not make it. Hawthorne paused. General Williams made 2 calls, one to the Oval Office, one to me. Within 6 hours, we had a team mobilized to retrieve his son and transport him to Walter Reed. But when we arrived at St. Catharines, we found out your Dr. Reinhardt had filed termination paperwork and was pushing for criminal charges against the woman who saved the general's son's life. The pieces were falling into place. So you're here to... Helen trailed off. To recruit you, Hawthorne said simply. We need combat medics with your experience. The kind who can make decisions under pressure. Who won't hesitate when hesitation means death? Ghost. He used her call sign like a title of honor. I'm 52 years old, Helen said. I have bad knees and shaking hands, and you just performed a flawless needle decompression on a dying patient while a spoiled doctor threw a tantrum, Hawthorne interrupted. Your hands shake because of nerve damage from repeated combat injuries, but they steady when lives are on the line. That's not weakness. That's your body remembering what matters. Hansen spoke up. Ma'am, we need you. My team specifically. We deploy in 2 weeks to train local forces in Syria. We need a medical officer, someone who's been there, who knows what combat actually looks like. I can't... Yes, you can, Hawthorne said. You kept the wrong promise, Colonel. Time to keep the right one. Helen looked at the 3 SEALs, young men who would face the same horrors she'd faced, who might die the way Sarah had. Died. Unless someone was there to save them. I need to think about it, she said. Take 24 hours, Hawthorne said. He stood, placed a business card on the desk. Call me. Or don't. But Helen Davies is done. It's time for Lieutenant Colonel Diane Morse to come home. He walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and don't worry about Dr. Reinhardt. I'll handle that personally. Hawthorne left Helen in the HR office with instructions to wait. She sat in the uncomfortable chair, processing what had just happened. The door opened. Dr. Marcus Reinhardt walked in, looking annoyed. He didn't see Helen at first. She was partially hidden by a filing cabinet. He was talking on his phone. Don't care about the optics, Dad. The woman assaulted a patient. Performed an unauthorized procedure. We can't just let housekeeping staff practice medicine. It sets a terrible precedent. He finally noticed Helen. His expression soured. I'll call you back. He ended the call. You're still here? I thought security escorted you out. They did, Helen said. Then why... He noticed the business card on the desk. Picked it up. Rear Admiral James Hawthorne, U.S. Navy. What is this? Reinhardt demanded. Jurisdiction, Helen said simply. Before Reinhardt could respond, the door opened again. Hawthorne returned. But he wasn't alone this time. Behind him was Dr. Ellen Vasquez, the trauma surgeon, Arthur Chen, the security guard, several nurses from last night's shift, and a man in an army dress uniform with stars on his shoulders, a general. Reinhardt went pale. Dr. Reinhardt, Hawthorne said pleasantly, I don't believe you've met General Marcus Williams. The general was in his early 60s, with the kind of bearing that came from decades of command. His dark skin was weathered, his eyes hard, but when he looked at Helen, something softened in his expression. You saved my son's life, he said. It wasn't a question. I did what any medic would do, Helen replied. No, you did what a highly trained combat medic with years of experience would do. While this man, he turned to Reinhardt, stood there consulting protocols. Reinhardt found his voice. General, I was following proper procedure. Hospital guidelines require... My son was dying, Williams said. Each word was clipped, precise. You wanted to wait for an x-ray, for imaging, for permission, while his heart stopped beating. I was trying to ensure we made the right medical decision. You made no decision. That's the problem. Williams took a step forward. I've read the incident reports, plural, because apparently this isn't the first time you've frozen under pressure. He nodded to Vasquez. The trauma surgeon opened a tablet, began reading. September 14th. Cardiac arrest in the ER. Dr. Reinhardt delayed CPR for 2 minutes while reviewing the patient's medical history. Patient died. Reinhardt's face flushed. That was a complex case. October 3rd, Vasquez continued. Motorcycle accident. Patient with obvious internal bleeding. Dr. Reinhardt ordered a full-body CT scan before treatment. Patient coded during the scan. Nearly died. Those were judgment calls. November 17th. Pediatric patient with meningitis. Dr. Reinhardt insisted on waiting for lab results before starting antibiotics. Child suffered permanent brain damage. The room had gone very quiet. You've been here 5 months, Vasquez said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. You've had 17 critical incidents, 12 patient deaths or serious complications, all because you're more concerned with following protocols than saving lives. That's not... My father's on the board. Your father, Hawthorne interjected, doesn't work for the Department of Defense. And Terrence Williams is a veteran, which means his treatment falls under VA oversight, which means I have jurisdiction here. He pulled out another folder. This one was thicker. We've been investigating you for the past 12 hours, Dr. Reinhardt. Your medical school record, your residency, your fellowship. Would you like to know what we found? Reinhardt said nothing. You failed your boards twice. Only passed on the third attempt after your father made a donation to the testing organization. Your residency supervisors noted severe deficiencies in clinical judgment and inability to perform under pressure. You were asked to leave your fellowship, but allowed to complete it after, surprise, another donation. You can't prove... I don't have to prove anything. I have sworn statements from 17 former colleagues. I have patient records. I have the security footage from last night showing you physically preventing Dr. Vasquez from performing a life-saving procedure. Hawthorne stepped closer to Reinhardt. You're a coward, he said quietly. You hide behind protocols because you don't have the skill or courage to make real decisions. You bully people like Colonel Morse here because their competence highlights your incompetence. And you nearly killed a decorated war veteran because your ego mattered more than his life. Reinhardt looked around desperately. This is a civilian hospital. You have no authority. General Williams spoke. Actually, we do. The Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences has an oversight agreement with this hospital for veteran care. We can revoke that agreement at any time. St. Catherine's would lose approximately $40 million in annual federal funding. He let that sink in. I spoke with your hospital administrator this morning. Gave her a choice. Fire you and maintain the agreement, or keep you and lose the funding. She chose the funding, Hawthorne added. You can't... My father... Your father, General Williams said, was also given a choice. Resign from the hospital board, or I go public with your record. Every patient. Death. Every complication. Every time Daddy's money bought your way out of consequences. Reinhardt's face crumpled. You're bluffing. Williams pulled out his phone, showed Reinhardt the screen. An email. Subject line, board resignation, Richard Reinhardt III. He chose his reputation, Williams said, over you. The general's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Reinhardt looked at Helen. There was hatred in his eyes, but also something else. Fear. The sudden realization that for the first time in his privileged life, consequences were real. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Hawthorne replied. It is. 2 security guards entered. Not Arthur. Helen recognized them from the hospital security team. They carried a box. Dr. Reinhardt, one of them said, we're here to escort you from the building. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal items from your office. Reinhardt's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I'll sue. You'll do nothing, General Williams said. Because if you make any trouble, I'll ensure every hospital in the country knows about your record. You'll never practice medicine again, anywhere. The security guards waited. Reinhardt looked at each person in the room, seeking an ally, finding none. His eyes landed on Helen one last time. This is your fault, he hissed. No, Helen said quietly. This is yours. The security guards led him away. His protests echoed down the hallway, growing fainter. When the door closed, the room seemed to exhale. Dr. Vasquez was the first to speak. I should have done that months ago. I knew he was dangerous, but I was afraid of losing my job, of making waves. You're doing it now, General Williams said. That's what matters. He turned to Helen, extended his hand. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You gave me my son back. Helen shook his hand. How is he? Stable, in recovery. The surgeons said he wouldn't have survived without the decompression. You performed. Another 2 minutes, and the damage would have been irreversible. I'm glad I could help. It was more than help. It was a miracle. Williams paused. I understand Admiral Hawthorne made you an offer. He did. I hope you'll accept. We need people like you. People who do what's right, even when it's hard. Even when it costs them everything. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small box. This belonged to Sarah Mitchell. Captain, your friend. It was sent to me. After her death, because I was her commanding officer at the time. I always meant to pass it to her family, but they refused it. Said she'd want it to go to someone who understood what it meant. He handed Helen the box. Inside was Sarah's Silver Star, the medal she'd earned for valor in combat. She would want you to have it, William said. Helen's vision blurred. She couldn't speak. Think about the Admiral's offer, William said gently. The world needs Ghost. He left, taking Vasquez and the nurses with him, leaving Helen alone with Hawthorne and the 3 SEALs. So, Hawthorne said, 24 hours. That's the offer. But between you and me, Colonel, I think you've already made your decision. Helen looked at Sarah's Silver Star, at the 3 young SEALs who might face the same fate Sarah had faced, unless someone was there to save them. You're right, she said. I have. And Helen stood. Her knees protested. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Where do I sign? The next 72 hours were a blur. Helen, no, Colonel Morse, she had to start thinking of herself that way again, underwent a medical evaluation at the Naval Hospital in Great Lakes, north of Chicago. The doctors were thorough. X-rays of her knees, MRI of her spine, neurological tests for the tremor in her hands. Nerve damage consistent with repeated combat injuries, the neurologist said, reviewing her scans. You've got some arthritis in the knees, probably from years of carrying heavy medical packs over rough terrain, but nothing that would prevent you from active duty with proper management. The tremor is your body's stress response, PTSD manifestation, but your fine motor skills are intact when you're focused. I've seen the security footage from St. Catharines. Your hands were perfectly steady during that procedure. So I'm cleared? Physically, yes. Psychologically? The neurologist paused. That's a different evaluation. The psychological assessment was conducted by a Navy psychiatrist, Commander Lisa Park. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes that had seen enough trauma to understand it. Tell me about Sarah Mitchell, Park said. Helen did. Everything. The crash. The decision to leave her. The 13 years of guilt that had driven her into hiding. You know it wasn't your fault, Park said. Intellectually, yes. Emotionally? Helen shrugged. Survivor's guilt is common among combat. Veterans, especially among medics who feel responsible for every life they couldn't save. I am responsible. You're human. You did your best in an impossible situation. Sarah knew that. That's why she gave you her final order, to not let guilt destroy you. I didn't follow it very well. No, Park agreed. You didn't. You punished yourself for 13 years, hid your skills, became invisible, let people like Reinhardt treat you like garbage, all because you couldn't forgive yourself for being mortal. Helen looked out the window. The lake was gray and choppy, waves crashing against the shore. Can you do this? Park asked. Go back to combat medicine? Face the possibility of losing people again? I don't know. That's the first honest thing you've said. Park made a note. I'm going to clear you for duty, but I'm also going to recommend ongoing counseling. You're carrying 13 years of unprocessed trauma. It's going to surface, especially in high-stress situations. I can handle it. I believe you can, but you shouldn't have to handle it alone. Park signed the clearance form. 2 days later, Helen stood in a conference room at Naval Station Great Lakes, facing a panel of officers. Admiral Hawthorne, General Williams, a Navy captain she didn't recognize, and on video conference from Syria, a colonel with the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years in the desert. Colonel Morse, the colonel said. His name. Tag Reed Richards. I'm co of the advisory team Lieutenant Commander Hansen is attached to. We deploy in 9 days to train Syrian Democratic Forces in combat medicine. We need a senior medical officer, someone who's been there, who knows what combat looks like. I understand, sir. Do you? Because this isn't a peacetime deployment, we're in an active combat zone. ISIS remnants are still operating in the region. Russian and Iranian proxies are everywhere. We take fire on a regular basis. I've operated in similar conditions, sir. I've read your file. Kandahar, Fallujah, Mosul. Impressive record. But that was 13 years ago. Can you still do it? Helen thought about that. About muscle memory and training and instinct. About Terrence Williams' chest rising after the decompression. Yes, sir, I can. Richard studied her through the screen, then nodded. Welcome aboard, Colonel. You'll report to Hansen's team at Camp Lejeune in 6 days for pre-deployment. Training. We ship out 72 hours after that. The screen went dark. Admiral Hawthorne smiled. "Congratulations, Colonel. You're back." Helen spent the next 4 days in a whirlwind of preparation. Uniform fittings. Her old ACUs didn't fit anymore, and the military had changed to OCPs anyway. Weapons qualifications. She was rusty, but competent with the M4 and M9. Medical recertification. She'd kept her skills sharp, even while working as a housekeeper, studying medical journals late at night, watching trauma surgery videos online. She sold her apartment. Not much to sell. The landlord kept the deposit for cleaning fees, despite the place being spotless. She sold the Civic to a junkyard for $300, packed her few belongings into 2 duffel bags. Everything she owned fit into 2 bags. It should have been depressing. Instead, it felt liberating. On the 5th day, she received an unexpected visitor at the base hotel where she was staying. Arthur Chen stood at her door, holding a plastic shopping bag. "Arthur, how did you find me?" "I'm a security guard. We find people." He smiled. "Can I come in?" They sat in the small hotel room. Arthur handed her the bag. Inside was a box of tea, good tea, not the cheap stuff, and a book. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. "Every soldier should read it," Arthur said, "even the ones going back." "Thank you. I also came to apologize." Helen frowned. "For what?" "For not standing up for you at the hospital. When Reinhardt was..." He trailed off. "I knew he was wrong. I knew what kind of man he was, but I kept quiet, kept my head down. And I let him treat you like garbage. You escorted me out when I was fired. That's not exactly supporting him. But I didn't defend you before that. I should have. Arthur, you have bills to pay. A job to keep. I don't blame you. Maybe you should." Arthur looked at his hands. "I was in Vietnam, saw a lot of things, did some things I'm not proud of. When I came back, I decided I'd keep my head down, not make waves. Just exist. That's survival. It's cowardice." He looked up. "You didn't keep your head down. You saw someone dying and you saved them, even though it cost you everything. That's courage. Or stupidity? Same thing sometimes." Arthur smiled. "I heard you're going back. To the service." "You heard correctly." "Good. The world needs people who do the right thing, even when it's hard." They talked for another hour about Vietnam and Afghanistan and the weight that veterans carried, about the difficulty of coming home, about finding purpose after trauma. When Arthur left, he hugged her. "Come back safe, Colonel," he said. "I'll try." Camp Lejeune was organized chaos. Marines running drills, helicopters overhead, the smell of diesel and sweat and purpose. Helen reported to Hansen's team. They were a 12-man SEAL unit, all experienced operators, young faces with old eyes. Hansen introduced her to the team. "Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Colonel Diane Morse, call sign Ghost. She'll be our medical officer for the deployment. Colonel, meet Team 7. They went around the circle. Names and faces Helen committed to memory. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's second in command, a stocky man with a no-nonsense attitude. Petty Officer First Class Jackson, the communications specialist, quiet, intense. Petty Officer Second Class Williams, no relation to the general despite the name. The team's youngest member at 24, 8 more operators, each one a specialist in something: demolitions, intelligence, weapons, logistics. "Colonel," Rodriguez said, "we read your file. Impressive record. But with respect, it's been 13 years. How do we know you can still operate?" It was a fair question. "Put me through your medical drills," Helen said. "If I can't keep up, I'll resign." Rodriguez looked at Hansen. Hansen nodded. "All right, Colonel, let's see what you've got." They spent the next 6 hours putting Helen through every combat medical scenario they could think of. Sucking chest wound while under simulated fire, tourniquet application in 30 seconds or less, emergency cricothyrotomy on a training mannequin, mass casualty triage with limited supplies. Helen worked through each scenario. Her hands trembled at first, they always did. But the moment she focused, the tremor disappeared. Muscle memory kicked in. Training overlaid with experience. She moved through the drills like she'd never stopped. By the end, she was exhausted, sweating, her knees screaming. But she'd passed every scenario. Rodriguez looked at Hansen. "She's good." "I know," Hansen said. He'd been watching Helen the whole time with an expression she couldn't quite read. After the drills, Hansen pulled her aside. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really leave?" "After Kandahar. I read the report. You saved 5 soldiers. You were a hero. Why disappear?" Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she told him. About Sarah, about the guilt, about the promise she'd kept wrong for 13 years. Hansen listened. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I get it," he said. "After you saved me, I had survivor's guilt too. Wondered why I got to live when others died. Took me years to figure out the answer." "What's the answer?" "We lived so we could keep fighting, keep protecting, keep saving others. Our survival wasn't random, it was earned. And it came with the responsibility to honor the ones who didn't make it by being better, doing better, living better. He looked at her directly. You saved 42 lives. Sarah would be proud of that. And she'd be proud that you're here now, ready to save more. Helen's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me, ma'am. Just keep us alive out there. The deployment came faster than expected. 72 hours after arriving at Lejeune, Team 7 was wheels up on a C-17 heading to Syria via Germany. Helen sat in the cargo bay, surrounded by SEALs and equipment, trying to remember what it felt like to fly into a war zone. It felt like coming home. The team deployed to a small forward operating base outside Raqqa. The base was a collection of prefab buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Austere, functional, exactly what Helen remembered. Their mission was to train Syrian Democratic Forces, Kurdish, and Arab fighters who'd been battling ISIS for years. The SEALs would handle tactical training. Helen would train their medics. The Syrian medics were young, mostly in their 20s. They had courage but limited training. Most had learned battlefield medicine through trial and error, through watching their friends die and figuring out how to prevent the next death. Helen recognized that look, the weight of responsibility, the fear of failure. She saw herself in them, the first training. Session was in a dusty classroom with a whiteboard and a projector that kept cutting out. I'm Colonel Morse, Helen began in English, which a translator converted to Arabic. I'm here to teach you combat medicine, not theory, not textbook knowledge. Real skills that will save real lives. One of the medics raised his hand. His name tag read Assad. Colonel, we have already seen combat. We know how to treat wounds. I'm sure you do, Helen said. But I'm going to teach you how to treat wounds when you're under fire, when you're out of supplies, when the patient is dying and you have 60 seconds to make a decision. She pulled out a training mannequin, set it on a table. This man has a tension pneumothorax. Demonstrate how you'd treat it. Assad came forward. He examined the mannequin, looked at the simulated chest rise and fall, checked for breath sounds with a stethoscope. Then he hesitated. I would call for a doctor. There is no doctor. You're it. The patient has maybe 2 minutes before his heart stops. What do you do? Assad looked uncertain. I need imaging to confirm. No time for imaging. Decide. Now. The room was silent. Assad looked at the mannequin, at Helen, back to the mannequin. I don't know, he admitted. That hesitation will kill him, Helen said, not unkindly. Let me show you. She performed a needle decompression on the mannequin, explained each step, the anatomy, the technique, the immediate relief of pressure. You'll practice this 50 times today, she told the class. By tomorrow, you'll be able to do it in your sleep, because in combat, you might have to. They practiced, over and over. Helen corrected techniques, demonstrated alternatives, shared stories from her own deployments. By the end of the day, every medic in the class could perform a needle decompression in under 60 seconds. Better, Helen said. Tomorrow we work on tourniquets and hemorrhage control. Bring your A game. As the medics filed out, Assad approached her. Colonel, may I ask a question? Of course. You have seen much combat. Lost many friends, yes? Helen nodded. How do you keep going when you cannot save everyone? It was the question Helen had been asking herself for 13 years. She thought about Sarah, about Terrence Williams, about the 42 soldiers who'd lived because of her. You remember that every life you save matters, she said finally. You can't save everyone, but you can save someone, and that someone has a family, friends, a future. Focus on the lives you can save, not the ones you can't. Assad nodded slowly. Thank you, Colonel. After he left, Helen stood alone in the dusty classroom. Outside, she could hear the sound of training exercises, gunfire, shouting, the normal sounds of a forward operating base. She pulled out Sarah's silver star from her pocket, ran her thumb over the metal. I'm here, she whispered. Finally doing what you told me to do. Healing, not hiding. The metal didn't respond, but somehow Helen felt lighter. 3 weeks into the deployment, Helen had settled into a routine, morning medical training with the Syrian medics, afternoon equipment maintenance and supply management, evening consultations with Team 7 about various injuries and ailments that came with operating in a hostile environment. The work was exhausting. The base was under irregular mortar fire. Nothing. Sustained, but enough to keep everyone on edge. Helen had already treated 2 shrapnel wounds, one broken ankle from a soldier falling off a guard tower, and a severe case of food poisoning that nearly killed a Kurdish fighter. Her hands trembled every morning, but they steadied when lives were on the line. She was reviewing medical supplies in the aid station when Hansen appeared. Colonel, we have a situation. Helen looked up from her inventory list. Hansen's face was grim. What kind of situation? JSOC picked up intel about an ISIS cell operating 15 clicks north of here. They've got a high-value target, An American journalist who was kidnapped 6 months ago. Agency thought he was dead, but we got confirmation he's alive. And what's the mission? Rescue. Fast and quiet. We go in tonight. Extract the journalist and any other hostages we find. Helen's pulse quickened. You need me to go with you? If possible, yes. The journalist has been held for 6 months. He'll be in bad shape. We might need immediate medical intervention that can't wait for extraction. Helen had done hostage rescues before, in Iraq, mostly. They were some of the most dangerous operations. Tight timelines, unknown conditions, high probability of casualties. I'll need to brief the team on potential medical conditions, she said. Malnutrition, dehydration, torture injuries, possible sepsis. We should prepare for worst-case scenarios. The briefing is at 1800 hours. We roll out at 2200. The briefing room was crowded with Team 7, several intelligence officers, and a CIA operative who introduced herself only as Carter. Carter laid out the intelligence. The ISIS cell was holding prisoners in a compound that used to be a school. Satellite imagery showed guards, but not how many. Thermal imaging suggested multiple people inside, but they couldn't differentiate hostages from captors. We're going in with the assumption that the journalist, his name is David Chen, is in critical condition, Carter said. He was a war correspondent for the New York Times, grabbed by ISIS near Raqqa 6 months ago. Last video they released showed severe malnourishment and signs of torture. She pulled up a photo on the screen. A man in his 30s, Asian American, with kind eyes and an optimistic smile. The before photo. Then she showed the ISIS video still. The same man, barely recognizable. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, beaten. Helen studied the image, assessed likely injuries, malnutrition, at least 40-50 pounds of weight loss, possible fractures from beatings, dental trauma, signs of psychological torture. If he'd been held in typical ISIS conditions, add probable infections, parasites, untreated wounds. What's our extraction timeline? Rodriguez asked. Fast, Hansen said. We hit the compound, neutralize resistance, grab the hostages, and move to the LZ. Hilo will be waiting. Total time on target, 15 minutes max. 15 minutes to clear a compound, find hostages in unknown locations, provide medical care, and move half a click to the landing zone, Jackson said. Tight. Very tight, Hansen agreed, which is why we're bringing Colonel Morse. She'll focus exclusively on hostage medical care while we handle security. All eyes turned to Helen. Colonel, Carter said. What do you need? Helen pulled up her mental inventory. Lightweight medical pack, IV fluids and line kit, broad-spectrum antibiotics, pain management, probably ketamine for something this fast, emergency airway kit, combat gauze and tourniquets, hypothermia blankets. You'll have it. I'll also need a pistol. If we're compromised, I can't be defenseless. Hansen nodded. We'll issue you an M9. When's the last time you qualified? 4 days ago at Lejeune. Good enough. The briefing continued for another hour. Routes, contingencies, communication protocols. By the time they finished, Helen had mentally prepared for every medical scenario she could think of, and a few she didn't want to think about. The team rolled out at 2200 hours in 2 vehicles, armored SUVs painted in desert camouflage. Helen rode with Hansen's element, her medical pack wedged between her feet. The night was dark, no moon, perfect for the mission. Helen checked her gear for the 5th time. Medical supplies, M9 with 2 spare magazines, body armor, night vision goggles, comms headset. Her hands were shaking. Rodriguez noticed. You good, Colonel? Fine. It's normal to be nervous before an op. I'm not nervous. Helen paused. What was she? Anxious? Terrified? Exhilarated? Remembering, she finished. Rodriguez nodded. Yeah, that feeling doesn't go away. They drove in silence for 30 minutes. The GPS showed they were 5 clicks from the target. Time to dismount and move on foot. The team exited the vehicles with practiced efficiency. Helen followed, trying to remember her small unit. Tactics training from 2 decades ago. Hansen took point. Rodriguez brought up the rear. Helen moved in the middle of the formation, protected but ready to move forward when needed. The compound appeared through the night vision like a green ghost. Single-story building, high walls, 2 guards visible on the roof. Hansen signaled. The team split into elements. Breaching team, security team, medical team. Helen and 2 SEALs who'd provide her security while she worked. On my mark, Hansen whispered into the comms. Helen's heart was pounding. She could hear her own breathing in the headset. This was it, the moment of truth. After 13 years of hiding, she was back in the fight. 3, 2, 1, execute. The night erupted. The breaching team hit the front door with explosive charges. The security team neutralized the roof guards with suppressed weapons. Helen and her security element moved toward the compound entrance. Inside was chaos, shouting in Arabic. Gunfire. Flashbang grenades. Building clear, someone called. Hostage located, northeast room, medical needed now. Helen moved. Her security element flanked her as she ran through the compound, through a courtyard, into a hallway that stank of human waste and decay, the northeast room. She burst through the door. The smell hit her first. Blood, excrement, infection, death. 3 people were in the room. 2 were clearly dead, bodies in advanced decay chained to the wall. The third was alive, barely. David Chen was chained by one ankle to a pipe. He was skeletal, maybe 100 pounds. Open sores covered his skin. His breathing was shallow, rapid. Signs of severe infection. Helen dropped to her knees beside him. "David, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "My name is Colonel Morse. I'm a medic. You're being rescued. I need you to stay with me." She pulled out her medical pack. IV kit first. His veins were collapsed from dehydration and malnutrition. She'd have to do an intraosseous line directly into the bone marrow. "This is going to hurt," she warned, though she doubted he could understand. She positioned the IO drill on his shin, squeezed the trigger. The drill bit through skin and bone. David moaned but didn't fight. Helen connected the IV line, started pushing fluids. Not too fast. Refeeding syndrome could kill someone this malnourished. "Rodriguez," she called. "I need bolt cutters for the chain." Rodriguez appeared with a tool, cut through the chain in seconds. "Can we move him?" Rodriguez asked. Helen did a rapid assessment. No obvious fractures, no active bleeding. The infections were serious, but not immediately life-threatening. "Yes, but carefully. He's fragile." 2 SEALs lifted David onto a collapsible stretcher. Helen kept the IV line running as they moved. "Compound secure," Hansen reported. "No other living hostages. We're clear to extract." The team moved as one unit back through the compound, through the courtyard, out into the night. The landing zone was 500 meters away. Helicopters appeared overhead. Blackhawks, rotors cutting the night air. They loaded David into the first helo. Helen climbed in after him, maintaining the IV line, monitoring his vitals. "We're up," the crew chief shouted. The helicopter lifted off. Through the open door, Helen could see the compound shrinking below. The mission had taken 14 minutes, 1 minute under the timeline. She turned, her attention back to David. His pulse was thready but present. Oxygen saturation was climbing, blood pressure stabilizing. He'd live. She'd saved another one. David Chen spent 3 days in the field hospital at the FOB before being transported to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Helen visited him before the medevac flight. He was conscious now, still weak, but aware. "Colonel Morse," he said, his voice raspy. "They told me you pulled me out." "The team pulled you out. I just kept you alive long enough to get here." "Still, thank you." He paused. "I was ready to die in that room, had made peace with it. Then you showed up like some kind of ghost." Helen smiled. "That's what they used to call me. Ghost. Fitting." He coughed, winced. "Will you do something for me?" "If I can. Tell my story, what you did, what the team did. People need to know there are still people fighting the good fight." "I'm not much for publicity." "I know. I looked you up. Decorated combat medic who disappeared for 13 years. Worked as a housekeeper, saved a general's son, came back to the fight." Helen frowned. "How do you know all that?" "I'm a journalist. Even half dead, I do research." He smiled weakly. "Your story is inspiration. People need inspiration right now. People need a lot of things. I'm not sure inspiration from me is one of them." "You're wrong, but I won't push." David closed his eyes. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything." The medevac team came to collect him. Helen watched the helicopter disappear into the sky. Hansen appeared beside her. "A hell of a first mission back," he said. "Hell of a mission, period." "You did good, Colonel. Really good." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the empty sky. "Hansen," Helen said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you think we make a difference, really? We save one journalist while thousands suffer. We train medics while the war keeps grinding people up. What's the point?" Hansen considered the question. "The point is that David Chen gets to go home, gets to see his family, gets to tell stories again. The point is that the medics we train will save lives we'll never know about. The point is that we do what we can where we are with what we have." He turned to face her. "Sarah Mitchell told you the same thing. Don't let guilt destroy you. Keep healing. You're doing that now. That's the point." Helen nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess it is." 6 months later. Helen sat in a conference room at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. She was wearing her dress uniform, ACUs with her rank insignia, her unit patch, and a row of ribbons that told the story of her service. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, Combat Medical Badge, and now a new one, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal for her work in Syria. The room was filled with people, admirals. Hawthorne, General Williams, Colonel Richards, the entire Team 7, and, sitting in the front row, Terrence Williams. The general's son had made a full recovery. He was back in school, studying social work, planning to help other veterans struggling with PTSD. He'd wanted to be here for this. Also in attendance, Dr. Ellen Vasquez from St. Catherine's, Arthur Chen, several of the Syrian medics Helen had trained, now in the U.S. for advanced medical training, and via video conference, David Chen. He'd written a series of articles about his rescue and about Helen's story. The series had won him a Pulitzer Prize. The ceremony was about to begin. A Navy captain stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to recognize Lieutenant Colonel Diane Morse for her extraordinary service to our nation. Colonel Morse's career spans 2 decades of combat medicine, training the next generation of medical professionals, and leading by example in the most challenging environments. The captain read from a citation. Helen's deployments, her saves, her leadership in Syria. But Colonel Morse's story is not just about her military service, the captain continued. It's about resilience, about coming back from darkness, about honoring those we've lost by continuing their mission. He nodded to General Williams. The general stood, walked to the podium carrying a small box. Colonel Morse, he said, would you please come forward? Helen stood. Her knees protested. She walked to the podium, standing at attention. The Defense Meritorious Service Medal is awarded to members of the armed forces who distinguished themselves by exceptionally meritorious service in a duty of great responsibility, Williams said. But this ceremony isn't just about a medal. He opened the box. Inside was the medal, yes, but also something else, a letter, handwritten. This letter was found among Captain Sarah Mitchell's personal effects after her death, Williams said. It was never sent because she died before she could mail it, but it was addressed to you. Helen's breath caught. Williams unfolded the letter and began to read. Dear Diane, Sarah's words, after 13 years. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Hazard of the job, right? But I need you to know something before I go. Helen felt tears building. You are the best medic I've ever served with, the best friend I've ever had. You save lives not just with your skills, but with your courage. Your refusal to give up on people, even when they've given up on themselves. Williams paused, looked at Helen. I know you'll blame yourself if something happens to me. Don't. We both chose this life. We both knew the risks. And if I die doing this work, I die knowing I made a difference. Helen couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Promise me something, Diane. Don't let my death stop you from being who you are. Don't let guilt make you small. The world needs healers like you. People who run toward danger instead of away from it. People who see someone dying and refuse to accept it. William's voice was thick with emotion now. Keep healing. Keep fighting. Keep being Ghost. And know that, wherever I am, I'm proud of you. Always. The room was silent. Even the hardened seals were wiping their eyes. Williams carefully refolded the letter, handed it to Helen along with the medal box. Captain Mitchell would be proud of what you've done, he said. Coming back, training the next generation, saving lives. You honored her memory by refusing to stay hidden. Helen couldn't speak. She just nodded. Williams stepped back, saluted. The entire room stood. Every military person in attendance rendered the sharpest salute Helen had ever received. She returned it, tears streaming down her face. After the ceremony, Helen found herself surrounded by people wanting to thank her, congratulate her, tell her their stories. Terrence Williams hugged her. I'm alive because you didn't give up. I'm living because you refused to stay silent. Thank you. Assad, the Syrian medic, shook her hand. Colonel, I return to Syria next month. Because of your training, I will save many lives. Your lessons will echo in every life I save. Arthur Chen approached quietly. You did good, Colonel. Sarah would be proud. Thank you, Arthur. Dr. Vasquez was next. St. Catherine's isn't the same without you. We fired 3 more incompetent doctors after the Reinhardt incident. The new attending is actually competent. Imagine that. Sounds like progress. It is, and you started it. By refusing to accept that incompetence was acceptable. Hansen and Team 7 waited until the crowd thinned. Colonel, Hansen said, got a question for you. Shoot. We deploy again in 3 months, back to Syria. Would you consider coming with us? Helen thought about it, about the work, the danger, the purpose. I'd be honored, she said. Rodriguez grinned. Outstanding. We'll keep you busy, ma'am. I'm counting on it. That evening, Helen sat alone in her quarters at Walter Reed. The metal box was on the desk beside Sarah's silver star. The letter was in her hands. She read it again. And again, searching for meaning she'd been too guilty to see 13 years ago. Keep healing. Keep fighting. Keep being Ghost. She'd kept the wrong promise for 13 years. Punished herself for being human. Hidden her skills because using them reminded her of failure. But Sarah hadn't asked her to stop. She'd asked her to continue. Helen pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, found a number she hadn't called in years. It rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello? Mom, it's Diane. A pause, then, Diane? Oh my God. Diane, is that really you? It's me, Mom. Where are you? Are you okay? It's been years. I know, I'm sorry. I needed time, but I'm back now, and I have some things to tell you. They talked for 2 hours. Helen told her mother everything. The deployments, Sarah's death, the 13 years in hiding, the return to service. Her mother cried, laughed, asked 1,000 questions. When they finally hung up, Helen felt lighter than she had in years. She looked at Sarah's photograph, the one she'd carried in her bag for 13 years. I did it, she whispered. I kept your real promise. I'm healing again, fighting again, being ghost again. The photograph didn't respond. But somehow Helen felt Sarah's approval. Colonel Diane Morse retired from the military at age 55. Not because she had to, but because she'd found a new mission. She opened a training center in Virginia for combat medics, military, civilian, first responders. The Diane Morse Institute for Combat Medicine, funded by donations from grateful families of soldiers she'd saved, grants from the VA, and a substantial contribution from General Williams. The Institute trained hundreds of medics every year. Real skills, real scenarios, the kind of training that saved lives. Helen taught some classes personally, but mostly she supervised a staff of experienced combat medics who shared her philosophy. Hesitation kills, competence saves, and everyone deserves someone who refuses to give up on them. Arthur Chen worked as the Institute's security chief. Better than hospital work, he said with a smile. Dr. Vasquez left St. Catherine's to become the Institute's medical director. Turns out I like teaching more than politics, she explained. Assad visited once a year, bringing new Syrian medics to train. Your legacy grows, Colonel, he told her. Every life I save, I think of you. Terrence Williams graduated with his degree in social work and joined the Institute's staff, helping veterans transition back to civilian life. David Chen published a book about his rescue and Helen's story. The dedication read, For Colonel Diane Morse, who taught me that true heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. The book became a bestseller. The proceeds went to the Institute. Hansen and Team 7 visited between deployments. They'd bring stories, share lessons learned, drink coffee in Helen's office. We're running your playbook out there, Colonel, Hansen said on one visit. Teaching locals, training medics, saving lives. That's good, Helen said. That's the mission. On the 13th anniversary of Sarah Mitchell's death, Helen stood at Arlington National Cemetery. Sarah's grave was in Section 60, among other warriors who'd fallen in Iraq and Afghanistan. Helen placed fresh flowers on the headstone. White roses, Sarah's favorite. I kept your promise, she said aloud. It took me 13 years to figure out what it meant, but I got there. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. I'm training medics now, hundreds of them. They'll save thousands of lives. Your legacy grows every day, Sarah, through me, through them. Helen pulled Sarah's silver star from her pocket, the one General Williams had given her. She'd carried it every day for 3 years, but it didn't belong to her. She placed it on Sarah's grave. This is yours, she said. You earned it. You lived it. And you died protecting it. She stood, saluted, sharp, perfect from the heart. Rest easy, Captain. Your mission continues. Through all of us you inspired. Through all the lives we save. Through all the people who refuse to stay silent when someone needs help. Helen turned to leave, but before she did, she looked back one more time. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for showing me what courage looks like, for giving me permission to be human, for reminding me that healing is the greatest fight of all. The sun was setting, golden light filtering through the trees. Helen walked away from the grave, through the rows of headstones each, one representing a life given in service. Her hands were steady, her purpose was clear, and somewhere, in the space between memory and hope, Sarah Mitchell smiled. We often hide our gifts because we fear judgment. We shrink from responsibility because we remember our failures. We let others define our worth because we've forgotten our own strength. But the world needs people who run toward danger instead of away from it, who use their skills even when it costs them everything, who refuse to accept that someone's life is beyond saving. The world needs healers, fighters, people who won't stay silent when they witness injustice. The world needs you, not the version of you that plays it safe, not the invisible version that keeps its head down, the real you. The capable, courageous, competent you that knows what needs to be done and does it anyway. Colonel Diane Morse spent 13 years being invisible, hiding, punishing herself for being human. But she came back. And in coming back, she saved countless lives. Your comeback story is waiting. What promise have you been keeping wrong? What gift have you been hiding? What would it take for you to step out of the shadows and be who you were always meant to be? The world is waiting. Be Ghost. This story is dedicated to every combat medic, every first responder, every healer who runs toward danger when everyone else runs away. You're seen, You are valued. Your work matters. Thank you for your service. Subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Like, share, and comment below with your own story of comeback and resilience.